Get the fastest internet available in North Central Washington by switching to LocalTel and get speeds up to 1,000 meg. Call 888-8888 today or go online to localtel.net.
Welcome once again to Let's Learn here on the NCW Life Channel. I'm Eric Grandstrom, your host of Let's Learn, and on this series we're talking about death, specifically death and dying, and having a conversation, because it seems that no one wants to have it, but we all should, so that our loved ones know what we want when our time comes. And on this particular episode, we're continuing our conversation with Jeffrey Wilson, who's the owner, funeral director, and embalmer at Heritage Memorial Chapel in East Wenatchee. And Jeffrey, thanks for staying over for a second episode.
Oh, no problem.
We left off talking about dealing with the body. Once you're called and you know that you have to retrieve the body, and we started getting into that conversation. And I at one time was close with a nurse, and she was in cardiac care, and so in the hospital they had people that didn't make it.
Right.
And just a conversation about the body itself, and I guess chemically and physically what happens with the body, and what people can expect with a person who's passed, because you know you're in that emotional state of that loved one passing away, and you move the body, you change the body around it all. It's going to make a sound. It's going to do things that you wouldn't expect, and then suddenly, is that true?
Yeah, it can, and I was in that category, obviously. I wasn't planning on being a mortician, so those kind of things would spook me.
Yeah.
I had to talk to God about that a lot, and has to go away or I can't do this job.
Right.
So when a person actually dies, they relax. So when we relax, bodily functions are going to happen. And so, you know, our bathroom problems can happen. That's some of the things that we have to deal with. And if you do move a body and they expel air, sometimes it can be like a snore or something, and it can spook people. So we like to explain that if they're in front of us when those kind of things happen. So it can make a difference, yeah.
So tell me, take me through that process once you remove the body. And I'm sorry, you were talking about a sheet last time. Is there a bag? Is there something, you know, we hear the term body bag, and I don't know if you use that terminology or not.
That's a more of a
military reference, I think.
Well, yeah, I think that's where that came from, but it's a true reference. When you're talking the coroner, that's a body bag would be what they talk about. More commonly would be called a disaster pouch. If you're out in the wilderness and you have to bring someone out that's in an airplane accident, obviously you use a disaster pouch. Sure. The state of Washington requires that anytime we make that removal, that person be in a wrapping such that there can be no bodily fluids escape. Okay. Now there's a couple ways of doing that, but what we like to use on our mortuary stretcher is what we call a cot cover. Cot cover has a vinyl lining to it, and it zips closed so it looks better. And any bodily fluids, if they were to get to that degree, would be caught up in that. That does the same thing as a disaster pouch, but it's not like that. And it's very rare that anything like that really happens for what we're doing. If it's to that degree, obviously you're going to use a mortuary pouch.
So the vehicle that transports the body from where it is, whether it's the hospital, whether it's the morgue, whether it's a home, to your facility, is that the hearse we see in the cemetery procession, or is that a...
Traditionally not.
Okay.
No, traditionally, all of the funeral homes will use a van, oftentimes a minivan, for transport. Minivan because it works really well as far as a little bit of economy, not the funeral coach that gets 10 miles a gallon kind of thing, and it's not the flash, so you don't want... sometimes you don't want the neighbors to raise all that suspicion. It's like a hearse coming to your house would be like an ambulance, and people want to know.
Right.
And so you try to not do that. I think I've only known in all of the times I've been in funeral service one funeral home that used a secondary funeral coach to actually make home removals.
Oh, okay.
And they did get some reviews about, hey, you know, we don't really want that here. Can you bring
Sure.
something else? So
Sure.
I wouldn't want that either, because I don't want the nosy neighbors over going,
Right.
hey,
Right.
what happened over at your house? You know, we saw
Right.
a hearse out front. So.
So it comes to your facility in East Wenatchee. Is that where it goes?
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
then what?
It's processed through the preparation room. Preparation room is like a operating room, and depends on whether at that point in time, if it's a home removal, then we know because of talking with family, are we going to be doing cremation? Are we going to have viewing? Are we going to be embalming? What are we going to be doing here? If it's a hospital removal, then when we get back to the funeral home, if we don't, first thing we're going to do is look to see, do we have a file with records already that tells us what to do? If we do not, then we're going to be calling the family. Obviously, you don't get rave reviews if you call a family at 2:33 in the morning, because oftentimes at the hospital, there's a time frame from when the person passes away until they get the concealment cart to the morgue area and call us to pick up. So you don't want to call a family at those hours. You wait till morning and get in touch with them, and then you go from there.
Okay, so you get the plan of whatever the plan may be, whether it's cremation, whether it's a
Right.
burial. And interestingly enough, you were telling me the trends nowadays are a lot different than they used to be as far as
Way
choices.
different. Yeah. When I started in funeral service, it was 1975 at a very large mortuary in Spokane. It was called Hazen and Yeager Funeral Home on Monroe Street. Castle-istic looking thing, and the trend was they had a double crematory inside the funeral home, only funeral home in Spokane at the time that had one, and only 10.
I'm sorry, double crematory, what does that mean?
That means they had 2 crematory chambers. They could do
Okay.
2 at a time.
Oh,
They
okay.
had 2 chambers, 2
Okay.
crematories, custom built. The trend at the time was about 10% cremation. So now we're 85, probably +% cremation.
That's remarkable.
It's way different, and the time frame there was no such thing as refrigeration. So everyone was embalmed. You had technically a service, and then if you were, if you were a funeral director in Colville, as an example, and you had a family wanted cremation, it was a problem for them, because then they would have embalming, viewing, casketing, service at church or something, and then they'd bring this casket down to be cremated, and you could make the expense be more than a burial.
Sure.
For transportation
Oh, sure.
reasons, bronze urns was the big thing in those days, so it kind of became one of those intellectually elitist kind of groups that were doing that. Today it's kind of the opposite. So.
And less expensive to do a cremation
Less
than it
expensive
is.
to do it,
Is that because of the number of crematories that are available, or?
Well, there's more crematories available, but couple things. When we talk about basic cremation, you're not talking about having embalming, viewing, casket,
Right.
And you're not buying cemetery property, headstone marker, all those sorts of things, burial vault. So those are crossed off your list. The state does require that anyone to be cremated be placed in a container suitable so that the crematory operators are not handling the deceased. They're handling a container that gets consumed in the process, which makes sense. That came about in 1983 during an era that I called the AIDS virus scare. We didn't know a lot when they first found out about
Sure.
AIDS, so they just said, we're going to do this. You have to have something that, so you're not handling that. So.
We need to take a break. We're going to come back with more in this conversation about the funeral part of it and the funeral home part of it with Jeffrey Wilson as we continue with Let's Learn and our Death and Dying, a conversation here on Let's Learn. Stay right there.
Stay up to date with what's happening in North Central Washington. Go to the NCW Life Community Calendar at ncwlife.com.
Welcome back to Let's Learn here on the NCW Life Channel. I'm Eric Granstrom, and our conversation continues about death and dying. And we're focusing in on the funeral home here again with Jeffrey Wilson with Heritage Memorial Chapel. Jeffrey, we're talking about the process once the body arrives at your facility. The cremation option,
Right.
that's a trend that's, as you mentioned, a lot more popular these days.
Right.
And I don't know if it's because of expense. I heard that Washington is the #1 cremation state in the union? Is that?
It's definitely one of them.
Okay.
If you look at the United States as a whole, all of the coastal states have high rates of cremation. All of the states, the closer you get to what we would say Iowa, the more burial that you get. But they're in a higher percentage of cremation than they ever were before, too.
Okay.
Yeah.
We talked about the fact that now the law says you have to have some sort of a container that the body is in before cremation happens.
Right.
Tell us about that and how that works with the actual the crematory, the furnace. I guess
Sure.
I don't know what the terminology is, but what is that, and what does it take to make sure that the body is taken care of? And I learned that it's not ashes; it's the remains. And then what you do for the handling purposes after that, and getting it in the urn and everything
Sure.
else.
A lot of questions there.
Yeah, I know.
That was good. Yeah. So the cremation container can be everything to, or anything to what we call a knockdown cremation tray. Knockdown cremation tray is probably 85% of what we do. That is a wooden-based, wooden-side container that has a cardboard upper that folds out. So we can, knockdown means it folds up when you store it. And it basically forms the inside dimension of a casket. So that would be what's consumed in the process of the cremation. The crematory, one of the terms, you almost hit it there, it's called a retort.
Okay.
And most of all of the retorts would be the same exact thing as a kiln if you're doing ceramics.
Right.
It has the same bricking on the inside as a kiln does, so it absorbs heat back and forth. And it would be the chamber that you actually have that. So most of those have more than one burner, and they're automated and all these sorts of things. There is one that I know of in our state that actually doesn't have to have the same cycling of heating and cooling. It's actually designed with the use of space shuttle tiles.
Oh, wow.
So there's no heat up, no cool down. Once it's done, you open the door. It's absolutely unbelievable.
Now, what's the temperature
It's
that this has to get to in order to?
Temperature ranges during the cremation process is like 14 to 16, 1800 degrees is what you're looking at there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so you have bone fragmentation left over. That would be what we're going to call cremated remains. The cremated remains must go through a processor because each and every state in the United States has different laws about what is the maximum allowable piece of bone, cremated remain bone we allow in our state. So it used to be, and I think it's still 5 millimeters square is what's maximum allowable here. Well, the processors basically make things more like a talcum powder now. So,
Okay.
so you hear people talk about ashes, but ashes is not correct. It's cremated remains that you're looking at there. I'm not sure where the rest of the questions
Well,
went. So
that was the big thing about collecting that into the urn and how you do that.
Well, and the crematories do that. They through the processor, then it goes into a heavy mill plastic bag, and that bag will have a tag on it that has numbers that went through the cremation process. Those 2 numbers are required by the state. They will have the number of the cremation done at that crematory and the crematory's number that's licensed with the state. So it's an identification factor there. The numbers follow through with virtually everything you do at that point. Then from
How do
there,
you keep track of this is Uncle Joe?
well, you have to have identification checks along the way. First thing we do when we get to either the removal site or you have to check to see if there's ID. If there's not, you're supposed to put ID on and write that. But that goes on the right ankle, kind of like a event band.
Okay.
So those, you follow through with that. And then you have logs of where the body is and whatnot like that through that process. Cremation tray doesn't always follow through because there are cremation caskets. That's something that's been along for a long time. A lot of people have gone away from cremation caskets. This can also be used for burial. The difference between a burial casket and a cremation casket is cremation casket has less metal in it, has more plastic hinging, has matting that's designed to be consumed in it instead of a box spring adjustable mattress, those sorts of things. And there's also rental caskets. A rental casket was not legal when I started in the funeral service. It was something that came along basically due to cremation. Rental caskets have a piano hinge and the foot end folds down, and the insert that has the upholstery in it comes out and becomes a cremation container. So there's some differences
Interesting.
that way, yes.
And what's the purpose of having a rental casket? Is that
Rental casket,
to have a service and then...
that would facilitate, let's say that Dad died 20 years ago, was buried out at Evergreen Memorial Park, and they have a companion headstone for Mom and Dad. So Mom's already got her grave space. Mom's realized that, you know, I've been in medical care for a long time. My financial assets are to the point where I really can't afford to do all these things. But I still want to be buried next to Dad, and I have the grave space, so we could do embalming, viewing, rental casket, even services in the church with cremation following for less money than purchasing the outer burial container, opening, closing of the big grave, and all these different sorts of things. So there's things like that that are optional, and we're heavy on options because you have to explain a lot of different things to people to get the options, because there's so many now.
Right.
Yeah.
You mentioned the financing part of it, and there is the cost. And I wanted to leave time on our last segment to talk about that, and to talk about how important it is to pre-plan.
Yes.
And to work on the finances of all of that, because you know, first you're in shock that somebody died, then you're in sticker shock about what it's going to take care of them.
Exactly.
So
because we don't go to the car store every day.
No, definitely not. So we'll take a break and come back with Jeffrey Wilson here on our Death and Dying Conversation series as we continue here on Let's Learn on the NCW Life channel.
Please join us weekly for the 12th District with yours truly, Kerry Condata. Check your channel guide for times or go to ncwlife.com for details.
Welcome back to Let's Learn here on the NCW Life channel. I'm Eric Granstrom, joined by Jeffrey Wilson, who's the owner, the funeral director, and the embalmer at Heritage Memorial Chapel in East Wenatchee. And we're talking about the funeral aspect of this, or the funeral home aspect of this. And so somebody passes away, and hopefully they've made the pre-arrangements. But if they haven't, you know, there's the shock, I'm sure, that goes into, okay, we need a casket, we need a service, we need, oh yeah, the obituary, we need this, we need that.
Right.
When someone comes in, kind of walk me through that, because I know I don't know. I haven't seen your place. I don't imagine you have a casket sitting out saying, okay, here's the price tag on it, like you're going to the car lot.
Yeah. No, everything's completely different today. So when I started all those years ago, you would look at the casket would have the price in it, and that included services of the funeral home.
Oh, okay.
And so now they don't do that. In the late 70s, the Federal Trade Commission mandated a big, huge pricing change in funeral service, which is proper. It makes us itemize everything that we do. So we have a price guide that we present first. Now, the first 3 pages of the price guide are everything we can do itemized, and it scares people because you can't use everything that's on there, but the numbers are all there. So it's like, oh, this is going to be, oh, yeah, okay, we're burying Pharaoh today. That's not how it works. So once you get past the first 3 pages, you can go to specific types of services, and it gives you professional service fees. It can't give you merchandise because everybody can select different merchandise. Sure. It can't give you, there's a list in there of what things we consider to be what they call cash advanced items. Cash advanced items are things the funeral home pays for out of funeral home's monies to have done for you. It's exactly what we're charged. Perfect example would be certified copies of death certificate from the health department, Wenatchee World obituary charges. Those sorts of things are cash advanced items. So what you're basically trying to do with them is to give them as close as possible of an estimate. One of the things I learned a number of years ago, I came up with this phrase, and I'll explain this to people a lot. We oftentimes will try to look at things maybe they're not going to use, but add on there, because anything in funeral service that can be considered to be a surprise can never normally be a good thing. Right. So if you have a couple $100 come back, well, you know, that wasn't on here. Well, no, we didn't talk about that to start with, and you added it. But if we know that those are things that oftentimes we'll see added, you can detract from it, and it sometimes feels better.
I don't know if there's such a thing as a run-of-the-mill funeral.
They're absolutely not anymore.
I mean, just for the sake of this conversation, somebody wants a service, somebody wants, the casket, somebody, I know there's myriad of styles of caskets and everything else that goes into that. What is the expense that we're looking at?
That can depend also on cemetery. Does cemetery own property at the cemetery, or is the cemetery property needing to be purchased at the time? Because that right there can be, just the property can be close to $1,000. So you have to kind of look at those kind of things with them. If we're looking at just the funeral home side of it, where we've got professional services, casket, outer burial container, pastor, traditional gratuities for organist, vocalist, and then you've got things like obituary article, those kind of things. We can do those for in the area of $6,000 or even less, but it depends a lot on your big ticket players. Big ticket players are going to be really, your adjusters are going to be casket. So caskets really can range from under $1,000 to sky's the limit. There's one company out there that for a number of years now has made a casket called the Pharaoh. We call it a sarcophagus. It's 1,297 pounds of solid bronze brushed to look like gold. Oh my gosh. And it becomes the burial vault as well, and those are $320,000 the last I looked. Oh my gosh. We're not going to have that here.
Yeah.
But when you start talking about ranges, that's the scare. And so I actually had that casket company take my picture away from me for a while because I tried to tell them, okay, I have this customer that wants this casket. And we want to have it in the old St. Joseph's Catholic Church with the stairs. How are we going to do that? And they said, well, that's up to you. Well, you can't.
Yeah, no.
It just can't
happen. You're not going to take a forklift in
So they took the picture out of my book for a while because I used to use it. But, so it can range from that to a lot more, obviously, because caskets can go way up.
And this goes to the whole point of this series for me, talking about it, planning, making plans. For those folks who, okay, now we've seen this show. Actually, we should talk about it.
Yeah.
Husband and wife come into you and say, okay, Jeff, let's sit down, let's talk about this. I assume that you appreciate that. And, I talked with Debbie at the cemetery, and she says, yeah, please, come talk to us, at least start the conversation.
Yeah. One of the things I tell them oftentimes is, and it's not as often as you get husband and wife as you would think, but when they do, that's really a blessing. And usually we start with the wife because husband can't remember things like when they were married very well, so we try to keep them out of trouble. But I'll tell them when they come in, no matter who they are, you really need to take your right arm, put it over your left shoulder, and pat yourself on the back, because no one really wants to come in here and talk about these things. But if they do, there's options, and we have time to explain options, and they have time to make decisions on options that more fit what they have in mind and or budget that they know they have. They're making rational decisions versus those when they're in that God's anesthesia shock stage and not hearing. Because we're all like a first grader in school. We have 10 minutes of understanding. The rest of it's like, I want to play. We want to go away from it because it's too painful.
So Jeffrey, if people want to come talk to you about making some prearrangements, do you suggest they call first and make an appointment, or can they just walk in? How does that work?
Call first obviously works the best.
Okay.
If they are in our neighborhood and walk in, they may be able to visit with me. They may not. We may have to give them a little bit of pamphlet information and structure an appointment, or we may be able to visit with them as well. So,
okay. Let me get your phone number out there for folks who might want to give you a call, 470-6702.
Correct.
Correct. And they also have a great website where you can see obituaries, both for current and for past, and you can make contributions and things like that too. I thought that was fantastic.
Yeah, the neat part about that is there's two things we're told we don't like to do in life. One is public speaking. The second is we're afraid of death. So when you combine the two, that's very difficult. But you can go to the website and you can leave a memory of your friend on there as a comment for the family. So you don't have to be in front of people talking. That makes a huge difference. It's neat.
The website heritagememorialchapel.com. Jeffrey, thank you very much
Yeah,
for
you're
joining
very
us and
welcome.
having this conversation.
It's fun. We could go for another couple hours.
I know we could.
Yeah.
We could definitely. Be sure and give them a call if you have any more questions about some of the topics that we've brought to your attention, and hopefully at least have the conversation. It's Death and Dying, the conversation, and it's Let's Learn on the NCW Life channel. Thanks for watching.
Is your vehicle in need of a quick oil change or tune-up before hitting the road this summer? Stop by Quick Lube and Tune, the home of the good guys at 610 South Wenatchee Avenue.